Hi, welcome to this demo of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus and its integration in IBM Spectrum Fusion. The demo I'll be showing you is how we have an integrated user experience for data protection, which is going to be Spectrum Protect Plus underneath the covers, as part of Spectrum Fusion. Now, Spectrum Fusion provides container-native data and storage services for OpenShift workloads. And in this video, I'm going to be focusing on specifically how Spectrum Protect Plus provides the data protection piece. There are other videos out there that are done more from the IBM Spectrum Fusion perspective on installation and so forth, so be sure to check those out. Spectrum Fusion is deployed inside a RedHat OpenShift from the OperatorHub, and it's going to utilize either the Open Data Foundation or IBM Scale for the storage that Spectrum Fusion utilizes. And it's part of a container-native data service platform for RedHat OpenShift and IBM Cloud packs. So when you install Spectrum Fusion, it will automatically install Spectrum Protect Plus server and the Spectrum Protect Plus BAAS agent into that OpenShift environment. And so for any of you who have gone through the manual install of the Spectrum Protect Plus server or Spectrum Protect Plus BAAS agents in OpenShift, you'll see how simple Fusion makes it to do the installs. Once Spectrum Fusion is installed, it does offer integrated management of the Spectrum Protect Plus data backups. And you'll see on the screenshot over here and in the demo that the user has the ability then to do things like add a backup location. And this backup location is where we will send the copies of the in-place snapshots. So Spectrum Protect Plus will do an in-place snapshot on the storage that the OCP is running on. And then you have the option to send those copies to either IBM Cloud, AWS, Azure, or S3 attached storage. In the Fusion version, you cannot send those copies to a Spectrum Protect Plus vSnap. It's then possible to create a policy, a service level agreement, as we call it in Spectrum Protect Plus world, and that'll determine how frequently the backup, where to store the backups, and how long to retain the backups. And finally, you'll assign that backup policy to specific applications that are running out in RedHat OpenShift. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ben Randall to do a demo.
Okay, so what we're looking at here is IBM Spectrum Fusion. This is our data services platform for RedHat OpenShift. This is the landing screen that I'm looking at that's going to explain the core product features. But really what you need to understand is that Spectrum Fusion is deployed within RedHat OpenShift. And what I would do is I would go to OperatorHub. This is almost like a software catalog. You can think of it as kind of an app store where I download different applications. And if I go ahead and search for Fusion, the operator will come up. This is going to explain, the basic capabilities of Spectrum Fusion. I can see the prereqs for installing it. And then this is basically how I would install. Now I already have it installed in this cluster here that I'm working with. And what I'm going to be able to do is a number of scenarios involving data, but the one that we're going to look at today is how I would configure backup for applications that are running within my cluster. So this getting started page will actually take me through that journey. As I scroll down, we can see that we have an entire section on data protection. This is going to explain the basic steps that I would go through in order to create a backup for an application. It's really simple conceptually. I need to specify where I want to store my backups. That's going to be what we call a backup location. By default, Spectrum Fusion will take in-place snapshots local to the storage on the OCP that it's running on. But it's a really good idea to add an S3 bucket that's off-site, maybe hosted in a cloud like Amazon or Azure, so that we can safely store our backups. And then once I specify my backup location, then I'm going to go ahead and create policies. This is going to define how frequently I back up, where I want to store my backup, how long I want to retain that data. And then it's just a matter of assigning a backup policy to an application. And then I'm going to be all up and running. So let's take a look at some of those steps. I'm going to go ahead and add a backup location. I go ahead and give it a name, such as demo backups. And then it's a matter of where I want to store my backups. I have the choice of IBM Cloud Object Storage or Azure, Amazon AWS, or really any S3 compliant object store. We can go ahead and store backups there. And so it's really just a simple matter of filling out the typical information you would to connect to an object endpoint, the bucket name, the access key that's going to be used to connect there. Now, I don't actually have to add a new location here. I have a number of them that are actually configured already. I can see that I have 2 Azure buckets. I have an IBM Cloud Object Storage bucket. And then I have the AWS bucket, which is currently actually offline, so I can't really use that as a backup location right now. And so once I have these backup locations set up, these are essentially where I'm going to store my backups. And now it's a matter of creating policies. A policy is basically selecting a frequency, where to store the backup, and then how long to retain the backup. And so, for example, if I want to take an hourly backup, I can choose, maybe a time offset when I want to shift that on the hour, or I could take a daily backup. I can go ahead and choose the time, or a weekly backup. I might want to take my backups every other day, essentially. So it's a matter of configuring when I want to run my backup. And then I'm going to either choose between doing an in-place snapshot or saving an object storage location. So I could choose, one of those buckets I was already looking at, like my Azure bucket, and then defining how long I want to keep my backups. Maybe my company policy says that I should keep these for 90 days, and then I can go ahead and create that policy. I can see my policy was created successfully, and here it's sitting in the table. So I've defined where I want to keep my backups, how frequently I want to do backups, and now I need to go ahead and protect an application. So let's talk about what an application is. If I go into OCP, OpenShift Container Platform, and I go and I look at the workloads that are running in here, OpenShift is defining this platform. And if I go ahead and take a look at all the projects that are out there, these are essentially all the different applications that are running within this cluster. It looks like I have MongoDB. I have file browser application. I think that's probably the one that I'll go ahead and demo with. I have a lot of OpenShift specific services that are running. Basically, these are all the different applications that are running in here. And so to take a look at an example of a stateful application, right, because I want to back up something that has state, here's my file browser application. I can view the activity, the inventory of the resources that it's dependent on. These are the resources that we're going to back up when we back up this application. To actually take a look at the application and play around with it, of course, I'm going to go ahead and click on the route for it and launch my application. This file browser application is just a standard file browser. So this is no different than, say, on your laptop when you're browsing around the directories that you have. I can see that there's some folders that have been created. I'm going to go ahead and click and see what's in a folder. I can see there's some image files that somebody looks to be generating. And so this is the type of data that is my actual application state that I would want to back up when I back up this file browser application. The file browser application, again, is this project that is essentially a namespace within OpenShift, and that's storing all of the different resources that this application is dependent on. To back it up in Spectrum Fusion, I'm going to go to my applications view. And you'll notice that I basically see a list of identical applications to what I had seen within OpenShift. And here is my file browser application. Somebody's already configured backups for it. I can see how much capacity the application is using. The fact that its last successful backup was, this morning, not too long ago. And out of the 57 backups that we've attempted, we have 57 of them. So I'm going to go ahead and click in to this application so that I can see a better understanding of its resources. I could go ahead and assign a policy to the application. Now, it already has a couple policies assigned to it, but I'm going to go ahead and select the demo policy that I created earlier. And I can choose whether I want to run an immediate backup or whether, I just wait until the next scheduled backup. Well, I saw earlier that a backup got ran just less than an hour ago, so I guess I don't need an immediate backup. So I'll go ahead and uncheck that box because it looks like I'm recently protected, but I'll go ahead and assign the policy to the application. And that is now assigned. If I jump over to my backups tab, I can see all the different policies that are protecting this application. This isn't something that you'd really need to do. I'm just kind of doing it for a demo. Typically, you just back up an application with a single policy, but you could imagine I might have a policy that does an hourly backup and places it maybe with a local snapshot. And then maybe I have a daily backup policy that is moving my data to object storage. And so that's an example of why you might do multiple backup policies. But I can see the different policies that have been configured here for this application. And I can see a history of the backups that have run, which of these are in place snapshots or which ones are being stored in AWS. We can see some of the AWS ones have been failing. Actually, if you recall, my AWS object location was offline, and that's why I'm seeing some failure. I'm only able to generate that local snapshot, but not actually able to move the data. And so that's really what it takes to go ahead and configure backups for an application in OpenShift using Spectrum Fusion. The notion of creating a backup location, creating a policy that defines when to take the backup, where to store it, how long to keep it, and then just going ahead and assigning that policy to an application. Now, a natural question that comes up is how are we achieving consistency for the data? So if I'm dealing with an application that has a lot of different persistent volumes, how are we going to coordinate making sure that we have actual consistency when we take that snapshot? Spectrum Fusion will actually do what's called a crash consistent snapshot automatically without you having to do anything. Basically, what it will do is it will coordinate at its own data layer a snapshot for every single persistent volume at the same exact instant without any sort of need to quiesce the application. This can allow you to back up as frequently as you want because there's no actual application downtime or pause to the application when a backup is configured. And it basically simulates the notion of all the pods for the application failing at once and it coming back online, right? It's a crash consistent snapshot. For applications that do require application level consistency, where you're actually, flushing memory to disk before you take the snapshot because you need to maintain what's actually in memory, you can go ahead and create Valero style hooks to actually quiesce the application workload and then to bring it back after the snapshot is taken. For a lot of container workloads, though, they're built in a more modern fashion to where they handle their own consistency. You can kind of think about these distributed databases as a good example of that, where they're managing consistency across a lot of instances of the microservice running. And so in those cases, something like a crash consistent snapshot can actually be perfectly fine.
Great. Thanks, Ben, for the demo. Everybody else, be sure to check out the other videos we have on IBM Spectrum Fusion. Thank you.